What are the anniversaries you never forget? So began Mary Schmeek's Tribune column a couple of weeks ago. She then reflected on anniversaries that she and her family remembered. It's an interesting question. What do any of us remember? I, for one, always remember the anniversary of my bat mitzvah. In fact, every June 11th, I've called my friend Liz, my partner in bat mitzvah, or in recent years texted, and we check in, say happy June 11th, even though that's not even Shavuot most years. I continue to remember my parents' anniversary, even 10 years after my dad's death. I remember my friend Lori and Adam's anniversary, probably because it coincides with Pearl Harbor Day, or that's what they claim. And a dear family friend often writes me an email on the anniversary of my ordination, which I have to tell you, I forget the precise date, but she remembers, and it's always very thoughtful. Why do we remember certain anniversaries? There's any number of reasons. From loving the people they're about, to proximity to another date, that just triggers it, something on the calendar, right, close to July 4th or January 1st, to good memories, to the meaning of the event, to who knows what. Schmeek writes in her column, anniversaries are a way not only of marking time, but of organizing it. They keep the past in view. They're a way of connecting the dots from then to now, and of keeping our vanished people with us. Her column was particularly about marking her parents' wedding anniversary and pondering why she remembered it. But her commentary about marking time, marking any anniversary, certainly applies to many types. Perhaps we recall professional anniversaries, the dates of liberation, of freedom, graduation dates, moving into a new home, arrival in a new city, state, or country, new beginnings in our lives, the days our children walked. On the Jewish front, we remember yard sites, right? The anniversaries of death. This is one Jewish way of marking time and, as Schmeek says, keeping our vanished people with us. Those dates become sacred to so many of us. They call us to stop, to remember our loved ones, often to light a candle, or to come say Kaddish in community. We can even look at some of our holidays as anniversaries of events, right? Shabbat marks the first day of rest. God rested, so we're to do that. Passover is an anniversary of the Exodus. Shavuot is an anniversary of the giving of Torah on Mount Sinai. We don't tend to call those holidays anniversaries, but really they are, or they've come to be, at least for the festivals when the original agricultural holidays became merged with history. Why do we remember them? Perhaps it's about the people, perhaps the historic event, perhaps the meaning in our own lives, in our families. This week in Torah, we see a couple of those anniversaries, certainly Shabbat and Passover, commanded to us in a reiteration of the covenant. Our Torah portion, Ki Tisa, there's our bat mitzvah there. You're next week's portion in the afternoon. But our Torah portion talks about, it's the story of the golden calf. So Moses has smashed the commandments because the Israelites built the calf, and he goes up on the mountain, writes the second set with God, and we find in this portion more than those original 10, including the commandments to observe the festivals and Shabbat being mentioned twice. Shabbat's particularly interesting in this portion because it is described as what many of us know it to be, as a sign of the covenant, and is described in words that are familiar to so many of us. I'll give you the beginning of them in Hebrew and then read them in English. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat. La'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael. Ot hi. The people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout the generations as a covenant for all time. It shall be a sign for all time between me, that is God, and the people of Israel. For in 6 days God made heaven and earth, and on the seventh God rested from work and was refreshed. Those are words that we sing each Shabbat, certainly with the Shabbat morning Kiddush, as we lead into the words we know, but ending with Borei Pri Hagafen, and often on Friday night. The notion of covenant, of partnership and commitment with God is often a tough one for us to grasp. But a lived understanding of doing certain things because we are Jewish, or because of our history, our tradition, our families, that might be an easier connection than to say, I do this because of covenant. So how many of us say, well, of course I participate in a Seder. Or certainly I educate myself, or I've educated my children. Or of course I give tzedakah, I help those in need. We might not say that's because of covenant. We might say, well, it's what I do, or what my family has done, or I do it because I'm Jewish. If we connect back to some notion of covenant, it might be in there, whether or not we call it that. And Shabbat is, for some of us, one of those things that we do, perhaps each week, perhaps sporadically, perhaps when we have a yahrzeit, marking it here, marking it at home, perhaps marking it on our travels. For some of us, it's not so much of an observance we feel a commitment to, and for others, it's something we feel wedded to every week. But it's there. It's an anniversary. So I invite you, whether you look at Shabbat through the lens of covenant or as anniversary or just as a time of peace, to think about Shabbat in those anniversary terms. It's an anniversary of sacred time, the weekly anniversary of the first day of rest. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel writes in his famous work, The Sabbath, the first thing in Torah that is made holy or sanctified is Shabbat. Heschel teaches that Judaism is a religion of time aiming at the sanctification of time. And Judaism teaches us to be attached to holiness in time, to be attached to sacred events. And Judaism teaches us to consecrate what he calls sanctuaries, but he actually doesn't mean the physical space. He means sanctuaries in time, or a palace in time, a break from the rest of the time. For Heschel says, the meaning of the Sabbath is to celebrate time rather than space. And I don't mean space like outer space, even though we had a really cool launching from Israel heading into space this week. But the idea of space being the rest of our week, the stuff of our lives. Heschel writes, 6 days a week we live under the tyranny of things of space. On the Sabbath, we try to become attuned to holiness and time. A time in which we are called upon to share in what is eternal, to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world. Those words, written in 1951, are really timeless. Many of us here have studied them, I think most recently with Rabbi Daniels, but in various contexts. Who among us doesn't need that reminder that Rabbi Heschel gives us? A reminder to step back, to stop, to be mindful, to step away from the stuff of the week, from our lists, the things that make us run around, check our phones 4 billion times, look at our pieces of paper, however we carry the things we need to do. How we mark Shabbat and how long, well, there's much to offer, right? We can be here to pray and sing in community. There's Shabbat ritual, blessings, and dinner. There's time for rest, for enjoyment, for appreciating nature, for appreciating people, to reading the things we didn't get to read during the week, for appreciating music. Whether we observe the entirety of Shabbat or we set aside an hour or two, we have this amazing opportunity, particularly as Reformed Jews, to say, what is it that's meaningful to me in Shabbat? The key is for each of us to consider the backdrop, the governing principle of Shabbat, holiness. great to say that, because if you look around our room, as so many of you know, all 4 of our walls have the word holy in it, kadosh. That's a reminder to us, a lofty concept that is lifted up throughout our liturgy, including in the last blessing of Shabbat, the last blessing of Havdalah. That blessing says, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who distinguishes between the holy and the ordinary, between light and dark, between Israel and the nations, between the 7th day and the 6 days of work." Holiness, sanctity, is about setting apart. It's making it different. So that lofty concept can actually be different if we let it be. So the question to each of us to ponder this Shabbat and in the days ahead is, how can we treat Shabbat as an anniversary we remember? What does it mean to make this period of time, a small part or a large part, to set it aside, to make it elevated or holy? I invite you to consider this Shabbat. What does it mean for you to make Shabbat an anniversary you remember by marking in whatever it is that works for you? Reflect on that question, if you would, this Shabbat, and in the coming days, see where it leads you. I intend to do the same.